Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines across the continent. A court in Zimbabwe denies bail to 3 prominent activists after they took to the streets calling for the release of opposition leader Jameson Timba. Rights groups say their detention is part of a crackdown on dissent ahead of the Southern African Development Community Summit that opened Saturday. In Tunisia, at least 7 women, politicians, activists and journalists languished behind jails. Their detention taking on new meaning after the North African country marked the 68th anniversary of National Women's Day. And as France commemorates the anniversary of the 1944 Allied landings in Provence, 80 years on, descendants of African soldiers who played a decisive role in the success of the operation say the soldiers aren't getting the recognition they deserve. We'll bring you a special report. It's good to have you with us. We begin in the Zimbabwean capital, where a court has denied bail to 3 prominent activists charged with disorderly conduct. The 3 were among dozens that were arrested on Friday. Prosecutors say their crime was protesting the release of opposition leader Jameson Timba. Rights groups argue their detention is part of a crackdown on dissent ahead of the Southern African Development Community Summit, during which Zimbabwe will play hosts, with President Emerson Mnangagwa set to take over the rotating presidency. Eunice Manson reports.
Since June, more than 160 people have been arrested across Zimbabwe in what Amnesty International and also Human Rights Watch describe as an assault against human rights. People who have been arrested include students, journalists, union leaders and also opposition members. It's against this backdrop that the 44th Southern African Development Community Summit is taking place, and civil rights organizations have asked for the release of these prisoners. However, despite the international appeals, none of these prisoners have been released.
As civil society, we continue to appeal to the heads of states because they have an obligation under the SADC Treaty to respect human rights. The people who were arrested on their way to Victoria Falls have been tortured badly, and some of the 78 opposition members have also been tortured badly, and we have begun to question whether this summit is really a good thing for Zimbabwe, or it's just a public relations act for the government.
President Emerson Mnangagwa is expected to chair SADC for the next year. Civil rights groups hope that the other heads of state that forms part of SADC would put pressure on Mnangagwa to protect human rights, which is a core objective of SADC across Southern Africa.
To Tunisia now, where at least 7 women, politicians, activists and journalists are currently behind bars. One of those languishing in prison is Sonia Dahmani. The media commentator and lawyer was handed a 1-year prison sentence after comments she made criticizing the government for refusing sub-Saharan African migrants coming from Europe. Her detention, like several others, took on new meaning after Tunisia marked the 68th anniversary of National Women's Day this week. Lila Blaise and Hamdi Talili report from Tunis.
In downtown Tunis, the anger was palpable this National Women's Day. Hundreds went down to protest for women's rights, and especially for women currently in prison after falling foul of the government.
Today, this Women's Day, is a day of mourning, at least for us feminists, women in politics, because today there are women imprisoned who don't belong in prison. They belong in the streets, in organizations, in state institutions to help further advance women's rights.
Among those held is Sonia Dahmani, a lawyer and TV commentator who has been behind bars since May 11th, sentenced to a year in prison for sharing false information. This August, Dahmani was again summoned before court after the prison management filed a case against her for criticizing the prison conditions. Shema Issa, an opposition figure who herself was in prison in 2023, condemns Dahmani's treatment.
Because I was in prison and I know what she means. The prison is a space where you can't live, especially now with the heat. Access to water, to sanitary facilities, all that is very minimal.
And for those detained ahead of trial, the wait is long, for them and their loved ones. Like the family of journalist Shada Haj Mubarak, imprisoned since 2022 on allegations of conspiring against state security.
This is her hair that she gave me for Mother's Day. Every night I put perfume on it and smell it so as not to forget her scent. Since her first court appearance, the case was closed and reopened a month later. And since then, we don't know what the situation is. We still don't know what happened.
A new hearing for the journalist is scheduled for October, but no court dates yet have been set for other imprisoned female activists.
In the Nigerian capital, efforts are underway to rid Niamey of street beggars. Authorities are rounding them up and repatriating them to their villages of origin. The police have been given instructions to keep them out of the capital. General Haruna Samke says the measure is aimed at combating the increasing numbers of those begging in the city, an activity he says doesn't reflect the values of dignity and work. He's called the beggars lazy and argues they pose a danger to road traffic. Well, a similar move is underway in the Ivorian capital, but there, a crackdown targets both street beggars and hawkers. Authorities in Abidjan accuse them of holding up traffic in the country's largest city. Laws banning them have been in Ivory Coast's book since 2013, but now a special task force is being formed to enforce the legislation, a move that has been criticised as inhumane. Julia Guggenheim and Justice Baidu report.
Over 200 men have been deployed across the city in a crackdown on street hawkers. The task force confiscates goods and even destroys their small roadside kiosks.
Take it away, break it all. Madam, we already told you, we said this on TV. This is to help you. Take a look at the conditions in which you're working. The conditions are messy.
Beggars are also targeted. This woman has been arrested and is being taken to the police station.
Cocody is a suburb that used to beautify Abidjan. We can't continue to tolerate this deteriorating sanitation any longer. The other municipalities will just have to wait for us. We are going to visit all the municipalities. This task force will exist as long as there's filth in these areas.
The wave of evictions and destruction of unsanctioned structures has deeply distressed affected traders.
Last month they smashed my house. Now they've come to destroy the place where I work. What am I going to do? They want us all to return to our villages, and Abidjan will be only for the rich.
Some have warned that the strategy is repressive.
It's the poorest who generally engage in this small informal economy. So by targeting the activity, in turn, we also target the most vulnerable. This measure must be part of a wider framework where we can offer alternatives to these people.
90% of Ivorians work in the informal sector, contributing up to 40% of the country's GDP.
France has been commemorating the 80th anniversary of Operation Dragoon this week. The event saw Allied forces liberate the south of France from the Nazis during World War II. Historians argue that the tirailleurs sénégalais, a term used to describe African soldiers recruited from French colonies in sub-Saharan Africa, played a decisive role in the successful mission. Up to 20,000 troops from Senegal and other West African nations fought that day. Their descendants say the soldiers never received the recognition they deserve. Ali Main Indaho and Sam Bradpiece have this report.
The grandchildren of Abdoulaye Arman Diaye, a decorated Senegalese veteran, regularly visit his grave to pay tribute at this Dakar cemetery.
He went to France to defend liberty, to fight for liberation and humanity.
Many of the tens of thousands of troops recruited from Senegal and other former colonies to take part in Operation Dragoon, which liberated southern France from the Nazis in August 1944, are buried at the same site. Their families say they were not adequately compensated.
France owes us a debt. We're not asking for it, we're demanding it. French soldiers who were awarded the Légion d'honneur had the right to send their children to elite schools. But Senegalese soldiers didn't get this benefit. We want this education for our grandchildren, our children, because our grandfather was awarded the Légion d'honneur, not posthumously, but when he was still alive.
In Senegal and in France, the role of African troops in Operation Dragoon is little known to the wider public. This historian says their efforts were decisive.
This was not an easy mission. Many African soldiers didn't know how to swim and drowned with heavy equipment. They faced the same struggles as their French comrades, but they weren't compensated financially or given the recognition they deserved.
Just months after Operation Dragoon, hundreds of Senegalese soldiers convened at a military camp on the outskirts of Dakar to demand fair payment for their wartime service. Instead, they were massacred under a hail of bullets. A memorial ceremony is planned at the end of the year.
Now, it's known as one of nature's most spectacular sights. Wildebeests in Kenya are on the move for their annual migration. The event, dubbed the 8th wonder of the world, sees nearly 2 million wildebeests travel from the Serengeti National Park in Tanzania to the Masai Mara Reserve in Kenya by crossing the crocodile-ridden waters of the Mara River. The spectacle attracts thousands of tourists from around the world, giving a boost to Kenya's tourist industry. Well, that's it from us on the Eye on Africa team, but stay tuned to France 24.
France 24, your window on the world. Liberté, égalité, actualité. France 24, every art form.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.